Hello and welcome back to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, we're breaking down the year in the comic book industry in two parts. In part one, we'll look at the state of the comic book industry as a whole, as well as what things were going on in society that may have impacted the comic book industry during that year. We'll talk big picture about what's going on at DC and independent comics, then we'll shift our focus to Marvel. We'll look at who is creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics debuted or ended. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Marvel's longest-running characters, Matt Murdock. We'll look at what the year had in store for the Man Without Fear, key things that happened, and who joined or left his world before spotlighting one key issue or story. From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on a trip through comic book history. We are back with another new year. It is 2015, and this is going to be kind of a demarcation line because we're going to be ending the history portions of the episodes starting now, right, Dan?
Yep, Wayne's continuing on without me. I'm going to head off into retirement.
Not exactly.
No, we basically, and the closer we've come, the more I am content with this. Because there'd been, at times, I'm like, well, do I really want to leave off? Or do we just want to keep plowing through and get to the present, even if it might be more like we talked about, like journalism than it would be history when you get too close. But as we're getting closer and closer, even just being able to find what the trends are that are going on, find what, which are the big characters that are being created, find who the Rookie of the Year candidates are, is getting more difficult because there just hasn't been enough time to really let those things percolate.
Right.
So, yeah, I am sad to see it go, but I think 2015, as we talk through it, is actually going to end up being, especially for a story that's sort of focused on the history of Marvel, with comics as part of that, really a good demarcation point. Something big happens this year that we'll talk about that makes it actually a pretty good time to close off on a look at the Marvel Universe. And really, since we started in 1964 with Daredevil, but did the 1961 to 63 sort of pre-episode, this really, as much as a history of American comics, has been a history of Marvel. And so, there we go.
Yes. So, 65 years? That's a lot of history that we've talked about.
Yep, it has been a good chunk. There's no question. I don't know if, when we started this, I was sure we would actually survive to get to the modern age, but we pretty much did.
We keep outdoing our own expectations. I think is what I've learned across doing 3 different seasons of podcasting with you, Dan. Is that we keep thinking we're gonna do this, and then we end up doing so much more, and it's amazing. We are gonna keep doing Daredevil yearly reviews of Daredevil and what's going on with him. Those episodes might end up coming out every other week, so there might be, that empty extra week we would have done a comics episode for. That'll just be a week we won't have an episode, just because I can't keep up with the number of books necessarily and writing recaps and all of that. It's a little difficult, along with everything else I'm trying to get done, and so just know that is probably coming down the road here over the next few weeks as well. But we did want to call this out because this is going to be the last of the kind of the history episodes. And Dan, without further ado, we should probably get in and start talking about what happened in 2015.
Sounds good. Yep. It was an interesting year. I think this is going to be fun. As a note, by the way, I think you said 60-some. To my knowledge, 2014 or so would have been like the 50th year or so of Daredevil. I think we've actually covered a little over 50 years of Marvel. But
my rough math was off.
We will be about 65 years of Daredevil by the time we're done.
Yes.
63 or something like that, because it'll probably head into 2026. So a lot has happened in that time, right? And I think this is a satisfying end to things because we've taken this look at 50 years of American comic books. We've gone through sort of basically the beginning of the Silver Age with the birth of the Marvel Universe. We've looked at the Bronze Age. We've looked at a little bit of the start of independent comics, and then went into the boom of black and whites in the 80s and the big expansion and the crash in the 90s, kind of all the crazy stuff that happens as comics are sort of struggling their way through the image years and the like. We've gotten into the 2000s where things started to come back, and now really in 2015, comics are in as good a place as they have been in ages. We're going to see that total sales break 1 billion. We have a comic book that sells over 1 million comic copies again. We have all sorts of people who are excited about comics, and there's a lot of directions in the industry that portend just this great future. Now, all of this is not going to come to pass in every way, right? But if you just looked at things in 2015, the future looks pretty good. It's one of those so bright you got to wear shades kind of moments, right?
Sure.
And I think that's a fun, cool place to end it, sort of. So we started though with kind of that insular world of comics that I grew up in, and now we're in this fast-moving, media-entwined, and somewhat politically charged environment, and this is sort of a break point between those two.
Very good. The year in comics. All right, Dan, let's start off with the TV and movie adaptations for 2015. There's been, it feels like, an increasingly big number of these that you've had to almost scale back because there's been so many of them. I'm assuming 2015 is another one of those years.
It really wasn't.
Really?
2015 was there were some movies, but it's not one of those, like 1 or 2 years ago we had, I think it was just last year, like half of the, a tenth of the global box office was superhero movies or something.
Sure. Not
the case this year. We had a bunch of animated TV movies and specials, everything from Adult Swim type of stuff to Marvel and DC animated movies and the like. I counted about 14 of those that were major sort of direct to DVD or sort of like first run TV show movies. So the animated film stuff is definitely still coming out. As far as movies, we had a number of them at different levels. There was one that actually got great reviews called The Diary of a Teenage Girl, made on a $2 million budget, barely managed to break even somehow by making $2.3 million. It actually had people we knew, like Alexander Skarsgård and Kristen Wiig in it. This was sort of adapted from Phoebe Glockner's graphic novel of the same name. Not really sure why this didn't make at least a little bit of money. It's kind of a little bit strange to me. I know that tween movies that aren't animated do have a tough time a lot of times in the box office, but like Diary of a Wimpy Kid and things like that did pretty well. So, in any case, that was one of them.
Okay.
Other than that, most of them at least got pretty decent box office, regardless whether they were real hits or not. We had Josh Trank's Fantastic Four movie that came out. I don't know if you remember this one. $120 million budget, $168 million box office.
Is this the Michael B. Jordan Fantastic Four?
This is it is, and it's the Fantastic Four where they have Doctor Doom sort of as this guy who turns into metal and everything like this. Josh Trank was hired to make the movie. He made a cut of the movie. They hated it. They went back and redid and recut and re-edited the thing. So that if you look at the movie, it is essentially two different films. The first half looks and feels completely different than the second half.
Really?
I actually liked the first half of the 2015 Fantastic Four movie. And the second half of it is just kind of Hollywood slop.
Okay.
And so I think that Trank, had he just been able to do his vision, would have made a movie that maybe would have had a slightly lower audience because it was a bit more cerebral and maybe dark than you'd think for a Fantastic Four movie.
Okay.
but it at least would have made sense, and I think people would have liked it, or at least some people would have liked it. This one, really, nobody was happy with. 168 million, with as long as people had been waiting for this Fantastic Four reboot, and there was a lot of, especially after the first couple of previews, there was a lot of excitement about it. Was really kind of sad. By the end, Trank actually tried to get his name taken off of the picture entirely. They wouldn't let him do that either. It was a whole mess.
Yes. I remember not hearing very good things about it, and to this day, I have not actually seen the film.
Yeah, I actually liked a lot of things about it, but I think that it was one of those that too many cooks in the kitchen type of thing just really destroyed it, which was unfortunate. We also had the second SpongeBob movie starring Antonio Banderas. $70 million budget, made $325 million. The main thing about this, of course, it made enough money that there's another sequel. We get a SpongeBob movie 3.
Sure.
So, and these are generally, it's not like the critics are necessarily a big indicator here, but most of them were like, it's not as good as the first one, but it's still kind of fun. We have The Kingsman, The Secret Service, $90 million budget, Matthew Vaughn movie, made $414 million. Colin Firth, Samuel Jackson, Mark Strong. I really liked The Kingsman, the Secret Service movie. Have you seen this one?
I have not seen a Kingsman movie in its entirety. I have seen the church scene with them fighting and there being like some classic rock played over top of it. I don't know what Kingsman movie that's from. I think it was from this one, but I'm not sure.
Probably. Yeah, they're a good time. It's kind of like just almost like if you take a superhero genre and James Bond and mix them together, you're pretty close to what you're looking at there.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
Yep, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Jackson sort of just eats the scenery every time he's in this one.
Sure.
And that's a lot of fun. He's obviously just having a good time. We had some Marvel movies. Ant-Man came out. $150 million budget, made $520 million. Peyton Reed was the director on this. Not our man, Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright actually was the reason this movie happened. He'd been wanting to make an Ant-Man movie for years. He'd gone out and written the initial script. He'd signed on to direct. He'd actually started pre-production on it and everything. And it turned out that this was when it became very clear that Marvel did not want auteur directors the way that other companies did. He had a way he wanted to do the movie that didn't necessarily work with some of the things they wanted to do, and so they ended up just splitting ways. And I know that it's something that was tough on Wright because he's talked about the fact that was something he really had as a passion project, but still made some good money. Obviously, you've got Rudd as the star. You got Lily Douglas, probably one of my favorite supporting characters in years, and Michael Pena.
Yes,
he's absolutely fantastic.
He is fantastic.
So Ant-Man made good money. There were some problems. It was one of the few times you've really seen a public sort of breakdown in terms of the creators and the studio with Marvel, which was unfortunate. DC did not have any movies come out this year. And it's interesting because Ant-Man is in many cases, sort of the direct corollary to the problem DC got themselves into, where while they're not allowing a single director to take over and sort of dominate their universe, DC at this very time, coming off of Man of Steel, is going to allow exactly that to happen. So that the studio kind of loses, they lose control, and one director's vision becomes sort of the studio identity. So the other movie that Marvel has is Avengers Age of Ultron comes out this year. $500 million budget, $1.4 billion with a B in box office. Joss Whedon directs it. Everybody's starring in it.
And James Spader, which is just absolutely fantastic. One of my favorite parts of that film is the fact they had James Spader do the voice of Ultron.
Ultron is weird and scary in that movie. There were a lot of plot holes and things that people picked at. and that sort of thing. And this is kind of the point where people started to talk about how Joss Whedon may be a little bit of a megalomaniac and the like. But it made more money than the first Avengers movie. And people, for the most part, liked it. And with our classic sort of metric, there's an Avengers 3, which means that it did pretty well, right?
Yes.
So, but yeah, I think that when it came out, everybody had a lot of fun with Avengers Age of Ultron. It was kind of more of a popcorn movie than some of the other ones have been in a little bit. There wasn't, I guess, the Scarlet Witch story and the like. There were a few things about it that were maybe a little bit more serious, but I had a good time with Age of Ultron.
Same.
And then on TV, Jessica Jones and Daredevil both arrive on Netflix. Daredevil was first, and then Jessica Jones, both of which were celebrated series that were a lot darker and a lot more sort of adult, sort of what the Marvel Max line or something like this. One of your more made for late teens and adults type of stories.
Yes, this is not that. These are not MC. This isn't MCU Daredevil. This is very much the gritty street heroes.
Yeah. And then Jessica Jones, which deals with all sorts of trauma and horror, and the Purple Man is just one of the more messed up villains you will ever see in a semi-mainstream comic book story. So those were both really good, though. A very solid start for Netflix, showing that they could do their, like Marvel's street level heroes, real justice in the way that they did things. And then that, of course, leads into Nick Cage and more Daredevil and all the rest. So also on the CW, which already had Arrowverse and all this stuff, we get Supergirl debuting. That's also going to be a show that's hit for a number of years. Very solid ratings, really well thought of. I think that the castings on that show and the like were fantastic. They did a really nice job with it. So, but that's kind of where we're at on TVs and movies.
That's a lot of stuff. That is a lot of stuff. Let's turn to the actual comic book stores then. What were we seeing if we went into a comic book store in 2015?
So this is a year dominated by Marvel, is the first thing I'm going to note. So in the direct market, over 40% of all comic books sold were Marvel.
Wow.
So they, even for their storied sort of, domination of the market, they had a good year. Not just a good year for a company, but a good year for Marvel. And so the stuff we're going to talk about here is the other 60% of the market. What people were doing when they weren't buying Secret Wars. So while Marvel's kind of remaking their universe this year, DC's doing the same thing. They've got an event called Convergence, where we'd actually take a 2-month break from the current DC universe continuity. Effectively, they remade the DC universe at the end of those 2 months, and only 9 of the 122 ongoing DC titles that were published up through and into 2015 survived through past 2016. So
wow.
Any of the titles that either were going up to 2015 or created in 2015, almost all of them were axed sometime in late 2015 or early 2016, leading into this next stage of DC's development. So really, they essentially just completely blew up their environment, much the same way a Crisis Level event would have done in 1985 or something like this.
Sure.
Some of the things they were doing, though, that I really liked, they had Amanda Connor on both Harley Quinn and Starfire, and her and Jimmy Palmiotti did just a fantastic job with those books. They were fun, they were cool, they were interesting. There were solid Batgirl and Black Canary books. Black Canary was rebooted as sort of like the leader of this punk band, and it was very interesting and cool. Robin is turned into a super spy in a book called Grayson. So a lot of the Bat heroes are sort of taken out of their regular continuity, their regular sort of storylines, and reimagined. They had a story about Prez, where they reimagined this. Prez is a kid politician. It actually was originally done back in the 70s.
Okay.
And now they brought it back in 2015. Probably the book I was most disappointed in all of 2013 or of 2015 was Dark Knight 3, which was Brian Azzarello and Frank Miller, two creators I love.
I was gonna say those are some
Yep.
heavy hitters as far as creators go.
And I really expected good things, and it was absolutely just terrible.
Oh no.
Maybe other people loved it, but I don't think many. It was the Dark Knights since have not lived up to Dark Knight. It did sell
Sure.
pretty well, especially the first couple issues. But Dark Knight is still Dark Knight, and everything else are pretenders. In outside of DC, we had March Book 2 come out this year. That's the story of John Lewis. It's written by Andrew Aiden and drawn by Nate Powell. These books sold fantastically well in like the Scholastic Channel and the middle grade type of book thing. And they were a really good example of how you can do excellent history and biography within the comic book sort of medium. Two Brothers by Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon came out. These are the same guys who did Day Tripper, which I'm on record as saying is like my favorite comic book almost ever. Another great entry by them on all sorts of top lists. Image came out with books like Descender, Starve, Injection, Huck, Bitch Planet, Monstrous. Yes, Bitch Planet. That was one of the breakout hits of 2015. It actually was pretty good. I also really liked Monstrous. It is weird and atmospheric and creepy and very, very cool. Valiant was still out there and doing stuff. They came out with Book of Death. This is kind of like a series that rebooted stuff and did some cool things. Brubaker and Phillips were back with a series. I think it was a 4-issue series called The Fade Out that I absolutely loved. Adrian Tamain came back with Killing and Dying, the graphic novel. Stevenson brought out Nimona this year. Nimona has been since turned into like an animated cartoon and the like, and is a celebrated sort of like middle grade book. We had some things like The Age of Selfishness, Ayn Rand, Morality, and the Financial Crisis of. We had some nonfiction stuff like Ayn Rand. I'm going to try this over. We had some books like The Age of Selfishness, Ayn Rand, Morality, and the Financial Crisis of Selfishness by Cunningham. Essentially, this is going to be sort of a look at what was going on in the 2008 sort of bubble and the like, and how the American economy had sort of started to see the effects of Randian economic principles. Mad Magazine was guest edited by Weird Al Yankovic and Patton Oswalt this year,
Sure.
which seems like a natural.
Yes, those two seem like perfect fits to be editing Mad Magazine.
Yep. And then continuing on in terms of things that aren't necessarily comics, but are more comic strip. Snoopy actually got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's not a whole lot of non-actual people who are on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but Snoopy is indeed there. And Bloom County returned unexpectedly with Bert Breathed just starting to post new comics on Facebook, which was a little weird. Instead of coming back through a syndicate or whatever, he famously had all sorts of fights with the syndicate and stuff like this. He just started publishing himself kind of, on social media and the like, and then these were rolled up into books that would be sold in bookstores and on the direct market, which I really enjoyed because Bloom County was by far my favorite non-Kelvin and Hobbes strip of my youth. And it's weird because it very much is of the 80s, like in terms of the way it was done then. But Breathed came back and he still was good. It was still weird because everything he did was so much in reaction to like the Reagan years and all of that it took him a while to kind of get his feet back. But they still make me laugh. So
gotcha.
That was cool.
All right, so let's talk about sales and other industry news. You mentioned that there was a comic book that sold over 1 million copies this year.
Yes.
What was that?
A weird combination of two things. The comic that sold over 1 million was Star Wars #1 from Marvel. Marvel got back the license. And interestingly, if you remember, like back in 1977, Marvel was in trouble. And one of the things that saved them from bankruptcy was that
Star Wars, the
essentially,
licensing.
yeah, Roy Thomas somehow met George Lucas, and George is like, I'll give you the license for free as long as you get the comic out before the movie so that we've got some sort of a tie-in. And they did it, and it sold, millions of copies, and actually in many ways helped to bring Marvel out of what could have been a bankruptcy in the mid-70s.
Right.
Well, here, it's not necessarily keeping them from bankruptcy, but it definitely is helping their bottom line. The initial run sold really well. But then a company called Loot Crate, which was essentially a subscription sort of geek and gaming service. Do you remember this?
I'm very familiar with this. I didn't have a subscription, but like I knew people that got the box every month, and it was just filled with a whole bunch of really neat and interesting clothes and like little effects and different things like that are all over around a theme for that month.
And I think it was like pop figures and stuff like that. Started to go into those and everything. Well, a few of them had comic books, and one of them had Star Wars #1. So almost 450,000 copies of Star Wars #1 were ordered by the Loot Crate folks so that they could populate them out into their loot crates.
Wow.
We similarly had about 500,000 copies of something called Bravest Warriors and Orphan Black, making them the 3 highest selling copies or comics of the year.
Sure.
Because each of them had an issue that was in a loot crate. So the 3 highest selling copies sold way more than anything else, and it's because of that subscription service. But even though there's an asterisk by it, it's still the first time in over 20 years that a comic book has, on its first run, or probably any run, has sold over 1 million copies. So
that's crazy and also very cool at the same time.
Yep, basically since the Image years, we haven't had anything like that. Marvel, in general, though, just dominated this year with Star Wars, Secret Wars, which we're going to talk about, and also a host of new #1 issues coming out of Secret Wars, to the extent that 16 of the top 25 issues were either Star Wars or Secret Wars related.
Wow.
And overall, they had about 40% of the market. DC had about 27% of the market, and everybody else came in somewhere behind in the lower part of that last third. So
you said the market this year, though, overall was up too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The market in direct market was up about 7% to 579 million, which is excellent. Bookstore markets also went up over 10%, although digital sales actually went down. So I think this is another of those canary in the coal mines. There was that idea that digital sales were just going to become this massive thing. Well, it turns out that a lot of people, when they first bought their tablets, maybe they would have gone out and bought certain comics that they want to read or whatever just to test, or they would, get a library of them. By this point, there's not as many new tablets being sold, and both the digital comic market and ebooks as a whole actually declined a little bit in 2015, even as the book market and the comic market were expanding. So people, at least in 2015, were still very much picking physical books over digital books with their wallets.
That makes sense.
That said, you put it all together, comics actually broke 1 billion with a B in sales this year, for I believe the first time ever.
I was gonna say, I think that is the first time ever. Even in the heyday of the 90s, they weren't getting to be with a billion.
No. Because they didn't have anything but the direct market at that point.
Right.
Now, they're doing 600 million direct and getting another 400 million from Barnes and Noble and all this other stuff that's going to make, or even it's still 90 million in digital, which every little bit helps when you're trying to make that billion, right? So
I wouldn't know, but yeah, that seems
I
like
guess
that makes sense.
From what I remember back when I was working on just that first billion, right?
Yes,
it seemed harder than the later ones.
Right.
Outside of that, we got a couple of things that are not related to the market itself, but I think are portents of things to come. The first is Marvel had already moved their offices out west a while ago because Stan Lee had gone out, way back in the late '90s and had started trying to bring movies and TV revenue in. Marvel moved the entire office out to the West Coast probably 5 years ago or so, maybe more. DC actually moves west out to Burbank, California this year as well. They've been purchased by Warner. They're part of this big conglomerate. It's obvious that the big money is in movies and TV and all this sort of stuff. And so to be able to better synergize with that and with their corporate overlords, they moved cross country. And sort of with that, they moved their focus in a lot of ways. They also, that 2-month break in the chronology is actually when they moved. So they took 2 months off during Convergence, had a bunch of guest stories and guest editors and all this other stuff. And basically, while there was a little less pressure on the staff because of the fact they were doing these middle stories, they all hightailed it across country.
Sure. Good planning, I guess.
Yep, yeah, seemed to be. And then to end things on a low note, if you remember a few years ago, we had the drawings of Muhammad in the Dutch comics that ended up causing such a stir.
Yes.
Well, that has festered for a long time. And in fact, the editor of the periodical, the news magazine that had done these, the editor of this Charlie Hebdo magazine, was actually on an Al-Qaeda hit list. In 2015, there actually were 2 French-born Algerian Muslim brothers who entered the offices of Charlie Hebdo, killed 12 people, wounded 11 others. They came in with automatic rifles and the like. This paper had been the one that had originally published those cartoons of the Prophet back in 2006 and 2012. It was, by far the biggest loss of cartoonists in any sort of violent event ever. I don't know we'd ever had any time where there'd been cartoonists don't get together in a place you can damage more than one of them that often. But this was significantly tragic for really the entire country of the Netherlands, and also just for all folks who are fans of comics and cartooning and editorial cartooning and everything like that.
Yeah.
So obviously it was something that made big news all around the world and kind of brought back into focus again that there are people out there who take comics very seriously. That, we think of them as sometimes as kid stuff, but they are a media and they tell a story and they can make people very angry, and they can make them angry enough that they will go out and kill people.
Yeesh. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Looks like we do.
Where do we go from there,
right? It would be nice if we could go to the Eisners, but it looks like we also had a couple other passings that occurred that are notable in 2015 as well.
Yep. So of course we had all of those Charlie Hebdo guys who passed on, but as far as American creators, Alan Kupperberg, who was an animator initially, he wrote in the comics. He's got some weird things that he did, like Obnoxio the Clown versus the X-Men. He did some Howard the Duck stuff, Little Orphan Annie. Kupperberg had written a bunch of stuff at DC when I was a kid, so he's a name that I remember pretty fondly. He died at age 62. Murphy Anderson, who is a very famous comics artist of the Silver Age and into even farther back. He'd done Buck Rogers. He worked on Superman. He did a lot of stuff for DC over the years. He died at age 89 this year.
Okay. All right, so let's move on and let's talk about the Eisners, something a little more uplifting here. Dan, what are some of the highlights here? What was getting awards?
Some really good stuff.
Okay.
Some really good stuff. Adrian Tamine, who has always been kind of a darling of the alternative comic set, won Best Story. Again, I believe he's gotten that before for a story called Killing and Dying in his series Optic Nerve. The best one-shot was Silver Surfer or single issue was Silver Surfer number 11, Never After, by Dan Slott and Mike Aldred. which is cool. Marvel again, getting in there. Southern Bastards won Best Continuing Series. Fade Out with Brubaker and Phillips won Best Limited Series. Best New Series was Paper Girls by Brian Vaughan and Chris Chang. Publication for early readers, Little Robot. Best publication for kids, Over the Garden Wall. Best publication for teens, Super Mutant Magic Academy by Jillian Tamaki. So I like the fact that we're getting more and more of these publications for different years. It is sad that most of these are things that, in terms of the direct market, we barely even see them, and there's very little sort of push to say, hey, buy this for your kids. Hey, buy this for your nephews or something like this.
Right.
Unfortunately, most of these, even though they're winning awards in the Eisners, it's going to be Scholastic book orders and things like that, where kids are actually finding these books.
Gotcha.
Best digital or webcomic is Bandette, a celebrated webcomic that went on for a long time by Paul Tobin and Colleen Coover. Best anthology, 25 Years of Contemporary Cartooning, Comics, and Graphic Novels by Tom Devlin. That actually was an interesting book. I like that one. Best reality-based book, March Book 2, that we talked about earlier. A bunch of other stuff that, let's see here. And they're now doing a lot of things on like U.S. editions of our other materials, all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to talk about all of those because there's quite a few of them.
Right.
Best writer of them, just Jason Aaron wins, which I think is perfectly reasonable. He did some fantastic stuff on not only Doctor Strange and Thor from Marvel, but Southern Bastards, which actually won, it's from Image, won the Best Continuing Series. And he also wrote Star Wars #1, which won 1 million copies. So getting rewarded a little bit for doing something people were getting in their hands as well.
Right.
Best writer-artist, Bill Griffith of Invisible Ink. Best penciler, Cliff Chang from Paper Girls. Best painter, Dustin Young on Descender. Descender is really a cool-looking book. It's got kind of this watercolor wash kind of art that really is fantastic to look at. So it's a cool book. Best cover artist, David Aja, working for Marvel. Jordi Belair wins for coloring. Lettering, we get Durf Backdurf for Trashed, which I think is awesome. One of the great names in comics, quite literally. Hogan's Alley won for Best Comics Journalism. And Best Comics Related Book is Harvey Kurtzman, the man who created Mad and revolutionized humor in America, by Bill Shelley. That was also a fantastic book. I really liked that one.
And we got some Hall of Famers this year as well.
Yep. A bunch of folks that went in. We had judges' choices of Carl Burgos and Tove Jansson. And voters' choices were Linda Berry, Rube Goldberg, Matt Groening, and Jacques Tardy. And it's fascinating that Linda Berry and Matt Groening go in together because they literally have ran sort of like mirror careers right up to their enshrinement in the Hall of Fame. So that's pretty cool.
All right. Well, as we wrap up looking at the year outside of Marvel, Dan, tell us, what was your favorite comic, non-Marvel's version in 2015?
So in terms of books that started this year, Paper Girls came out, and I really enjoyed that. It's this weird sort of time travel story that has a cool world building element to it that just really makes it a neat sort of contained storyline. I really enjoy Paper Girls. It's something you could give somebody and say, hey, if you like science fiction, if you like time travel, you'll enjoy this. If you hate time travel, as many people I know do, you probably won't enjoy this.
Me included.
Yep, you and my wife, both not on the reading list for Paper Girls. And then in retrospect, though, and I didn't start reading this for about a year, and that saddens me. Giant Days by John Allison started this year, and it is absolutely just a masterwork of comics. It has become. I have bought the hardcover collected editions of it. I still go back and read it. It makes me laugh all the time. Absolutely one of the best humor comic books I have ever read.
Wow, that is some high praise, I think. All right, Dan, we've wrapped up the discussion looking outside of Marvel. Let's talk about what Marvel's been doing since they're doing so well this year. The year in Marvel.
Excelsior!
All right, Dan, 40% of the market. They're doing everything. They've got 2 big movies that came out. Is it just them and then everybody else? Is that where we're at right now?
I think and it's not just in terms of comics. I mean, at this point, it is basically Marvel and Game of Thrones are the only things that matter in American pop culture right now, right?
Right.
So the movies are still huge. They're selling like crazy, and all in the middle of it, they decide to basically just blow everything completely the hell up and start over, which is insane in some ways. But they went what Axel Alonso, the editor-in-chief, said was all in. He said, we're doing an all-in event. It's an all or nothing gamble. And they decided they needed to reset the universe in fundamental ways to build for a better future. The thing is, the results were better than really they could have ever hoped for. Led to a dominant year in 2015 and really set them up in a very, very solid place in the market in terms of the books they're publishing, sort of the options they have for storylines going forward. It really was a huge success at the time.
Really? Okay.
Well,
So level set us here. Where are we at with regards to total series, new series ending, all of that sort of thing?
so 539 titles published. Of those, 383 were new, and 426 of them ended. So this is a year of contraction.
That is a big contraction.
40
43
books. No, something like that. So they're going to be publishing less, but part of that is just that they cleaned out a lot of things and now they're restarting, and a lot of those titles will keep coming back. They just didn't necessarily restart up everything right after canceling them.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Just as a spoiler, Daredevil is one of those titles. It ends. Its final issue is at the end of the year 2015, and then they start up a new volume again next year in 2016. Mm-hmm. So. And
have you started the new volume?
I have. Yes, I have.
Does it seem at all different than the previous?
That laughter should be a very big indicator that yes, there is quite a bit different. Not just from a tone, but also a look that is significantly different than what we've gotten used to over basically 2 volumes that were, I don't want to say they're exactly the same, but I mean, they had the same creators on them for the most part.
We'd gotten used to something, and it's very different. Also, at least for me, it was just weird because it seemed like everything had changed and there was no explanation. Not just in terms of the art style,
yes,
but where he's at, who he's with, who he's not with.
Yes.
Everything makes no sense.
We're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks when we get to 2016. Because, it is, brace yourself. There's going to be some whiplash because, we're starting at a completely new normal when the first book arrives. And you had really very little indication that there was going to be this completely new normal.
Yep, and that is in actual fact what everybody in the Marvel Universe is finding when they open up their titles in late 2015 or early 2016 is suddenly everything's just a little different than it was. Characters are younger, or characters are with different people, or characters are dead, or whatever.
Yeah, it was a little or a lot different depending on who you might be reading. So what was the highest issue number then this year?
As of this year, of books published this year, the highest any of them is going to get is number 75, which is Star Wars. Outside of that, only Amazing Spider-Man and Unbeatable Squirrel Girl will actually get to issue 50 before being canceled.
Oh, wow. goodness sakes.
So we were entering an age where most books never even make it to the half century mark, let alone, issue 100 or issue 500 or something like that.
Right.
They're being recycled very quickly.
And then the biggest selling comic was obviously that Star Wars book that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned the big event. The big event is Secret Wars, and that is different than the Secret Wars. I don't remember if there was an S on it or not, that we had a few years ago, right?
There has been Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars back in the early 80s with the Beyonder. There's been Secret Wars 2 and maybe Secret Wars 3. Then there's been Nick Fury's Secret War, which does not have an S.
Okay.
And now we have Secret Wars 2015. It's kind of like with DC where you've got the Crisis. These guys just love Secret War.
They like their Secret Wars, huh?
So because of that, yeah, this one is the 2015 Secret War, which is going to essentially be Doom becoming God.
Oh.
And so 230 titles between the 9-issue miniseries and all of its tie-ins, which is a fantastically large number of books, just isn't it?
That is obscene.
Think of the fact that this is still in the days where most people did not, have a Marvel Unlimited subscription or something like that. So to read all of those was almost impossible. It is also, I think some people have said, one of the reasons why even Marvel fans who didn't like the idea of going out and illegally downloading books on the internet gave in because of Secret Wars.
Oh, yeah.
Said, screw this. I can't spend $700 to read this story. I'm just going to have to go and download some of it. And so, unfortunately, that was a gateway drug for many of them that then meant that they learned how to do this, to read this, and then continued on. And you're finding that there are a lot of people talking about how, both in manga and in American comics, the prevalence of downloading became a real problem around this time. So there was also one other, just as a note, sort of crossover. It was only like 13 issues. It was called Black Vortex, and it was one that actually featured Nova, the X-Men, some of the interstellar races of the Marvel Universe, and that sort of stuff. And they're all going out trying to get this little gizmo that gives them the power of a Celestial. So that was just a small one, but it was kind of the one other. Outside of that, it was all Secret Wars this year. So
with 230 issues, it's sort of hard not to be, kind of the 1,600-pound gorilla in the room as opposed to the 800 one. Yep. All right. So what else was going on at Marvel at this time with regards to the books themselves? It looks like we had one of their lines ended.
Well, let's just talk about this. So Marvel Now had been the sort of branding philosophy that they've used through the last 2 or 3 years. They had a little thing on it that said Marvel Now, right? Well, Marvel Now actually then is the thing that sort of prepared us for the Secret Wars. And coming out of the Secret Wars, we're now going to have something new called Marvel's All New, All Different, right? So what happens is, at the end or the beginning, like in May of this year, March, something like that, Secret Wars comes out, and it follows on the heels of a series of stories where the various dimensions, the multiverse itself of the Marvel universes, start to crash into each other and essentially annihilate each other. Until you get down to the end where there's only 2 universes left, and it's the Marvel Ultimate Universe of Miles Morales and the traditional 616 universe of the regular Marvel characters. The 2 of them then continue to squash together. There's a big battle to try and see if one or another can win. And during that, somehow, Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom are able to track down the Beyonders who actually started all of this. They were tired of watching the Marvel Universe, and they decided to just end the whole thing, right? They somehow managed to steal the Beyonders' power, and then at that point, they gained the ability, essentially, of a godhood. One of them had to take the power, and Doctor Strange is like, man, I'm just not cut out to be God. And Doom is like, this is what I've always been destined for.
Sure. So totally can't see that as a thing. No.
Exactly. So he becomes essentially, this is infested with the power of God and is able to use that to essentially save parts of the Marvel Universe in a sort of pocket universe that he calls Battleworld. And it has regions ruled by the Hulk, regions ruled by, whoever it is, different characters from different worlds. So you get all of these different patchwork areas, and they're ruled by various people. Actually, a lot of it comes back in Hickman's, because Jonathan Hickman wrote this. A lot of this comes back in Hickman's Ultimate stuff that he's writing this year, because there's a character called the Maker, who is basically a weird version of Reed Richards.
Yes. He's
involved in this as well. But at some point, this universe is created, and Doom essentially, because Reed Richards is lost during this, he's basically like, maybe I should just be Reed Richards himself. So he somehow convinces Sue, he remakes Sue's history so that she marries him, and they have 2 children who happen to be Reed and Sue's children. And he just kind of takes over as dad, steals Reed Richards' life, essentially, and then puts himself on the throne as the god of this world. Well, eventually, Reed Richards had managed to save himself by making this weird time ship. They crash in, start messing with stuff, and eventually they find a way to use a guy named Molecule Man to remake the universes. And essentially, somehow, all of his personages are supposed to be split out in the multiverse. So they kind of remake the multiverse one universe at a time. Reed Richards and the Molecule Man. When it's all done, though, things have changed. Because now on the main 616, suddenly Miles Morales is there. Suddenly some other people who previously had been in what if stories or had been characters that had been in other universes or other timelines now are just folded into the 616. We just have one storyline. Alonzo described it as sort of 2 pizzas smashed together, but really it's it's more like a semi-infinite number of pizzas smashed together, where you just take the topping you want off of each of those pizzas and put it on the prime pizza. Right? Sure. So that was the thing, is that after they did this, they brought it back. The Marvel Universe, as of the end of 2015, is not the same place, literally, as the Marvel Universe of 2014, because it has been completely destroyed. Everything was annihilated. Everyone was annihilated. And then they were all remade after the battle.
I guess that then suddenly does make a little bit more sense why things are so different in 2016, but good grief.
Yep.
If you didn't have that context,
yep,
you're just like, what the heck just happened?
And even if you do have the context, you're probably like, what the heck just happened, right?
Yes.
But the weird thing is, some stories changed fundamentally. Others just sort of skated through, and they didn't really. It's like the world before and the world after are exactly the same, and you wouldn't even notice it. If you're reading Howard the Duck, or I think like Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, they did not take part actively in it. They just kind of skated through, where their world is the same. So fundamentally, most parts of the Marvel Universe before and after look exactly the same, but it's a transported, recreated copy. So they were able to change anything that they wanted to change. And then in the middle of this, they did a bunch of other things called Battle World spin-offs, or like one-shots that allowed them to tell stories that were outside of what you'd normally have. For instance, during the Secret Wars, Khonshu was turned into a female bird god. So Khonshu's a girl. Moon Knight is this guy who's sort of hiding in the shadows, and he ends up trying to team up with some people, but it's not the regular Mark Spector. There's a very popular story called Renew Your Vows, where we get a look at what happened in the Marvel Universe when Peter Parker did not make the deal with Mephisto that everybody hated. And so
yes.
we actually get a couple of issues where Peter and Mary Jane are married, and they've got a daughter named Anna May Parker, and the two other Parkers also become spider heroes, and so the whole family's swinging around the city together.
Fun.
This is not to be confused, by the way, with Mayday Parker. Mayday Parker is the version of their first child that would have been if Norman Osborn hadn't stolen her and there was some cloning thing or whatever that went on. And then Anna May Parker is the second version if Mephisto hadn't happened. So essentially they ended up having two daughters. The oldest one is Mayday. The second one is this Anna May. And they've never lived, I don't think, in the same universe together. They have met, I believe. But, so, yeah. So, it's dangerous to be Spider-Man's kid.
Yes.
So, Nick Fury and Miles Morales, like we said, crossed over. There are so many Avengers titles. You got Classic Avengers, Bad Avengers, Space Avengers, Lady Avengers. They start out with like 5 Avengers titles coming out of the Secret Wars. It's absolutely crazy. But what's neat is there really was a focus on getting some heroes out in front that maybe hadn't been before, trying to develop some female characters into leading roles, making sure they've got some diversity in terms of sort of getting some of the black characters and other minority characters some leading roles. Spider-Gwen gets her own title. Also, Spider-Gwen gets her own title. She had debuted a little while ago and been really popular. So okay, let's go with that. I think this was a really cool time for Marvel in a lot of ways when you look at it. The Bacalo Doctor Strange, which I think I had you read some of those when we were doing Doctor Strange.
Yes.
This was written by Jason Aaron.
I remember that. Those were good.
They are so good. Star Wars titles. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's the one where he has that big thing in the basement that is feeding off of, like, that's the negative that happens because of the other things that he's going on. That basically everything had to balance. And so anytime he did something good, something bad was like creating this festering creature in the basement.
It wasn't even any time he did any good. Every time he used magic,
that's
something, there was a price that needed to be paid. And the price was partly paid by people up at the sort of the big compound where the Ancient One was. But also there was this creature that sort of was down there as well. It's called The Death of Magic. Absolutely amazing story. But I think that what really is cool about that is it was a fun story, but there was a lot of depth to it as well.
There was.
And you saw a different side of Dr. Fate, or of Dr. Fate. I'm going DC here for a second. Of Doctor Strange than you'd ever really seen before. So I loved those. Star Wars titles took off, like we talked about, the Star Wars #1. But then they also had this fleet of other stories. They had Darth Vader series that I believe most of that was written by Charles Soule. Really, really good stuff. Princess Leia got her own series. Chewbacca got his own series. Lando got his own series. And then that was going to expand out. There have been times where there are like 7, 8 or more Star Wars books just being published by Marvel at the same time. So it's like a sub-line really of the Marvel imprint at this point. And that all got started in 2015. So
you got any other things you want to note before we look at the new series?
Yeah, I mean, well, and this will be some stuff from the new series, but like we got a Midnighter book, which was unusual because it was a story that featured a gay main character and showed some of his actual like romantic life as well as just him being the hero. This, of course, is done in the year when America first legalized gay marriage, which I think is weird to think about now, but it's only been 10 years.
It feels like it should have been forever ago, but yeah, I guess it has only been a decade.
And there have been states where it has been legal before then.
Right.
But the Supreme Court actually legalized gay marriage in America for the whole country only as of 2015. We also had America Chavez, who came in, who's a Latina and was also gay. And they showed also that, her and her girlfriend, or at least a girl she was dating as well in some of the books I was reading earlier today. Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, we talked about a little bit, becomes a kind of unlikely hit, that's going to be one of the few books to hit 50 issues. But this is kind of a comedy book, almost a slice of life book. She's somebody who basically has almost no powers except that she can talk to squirrels. But she keeps defeating Doctor Doom, and she keeps, famously, eventually, she defeats Galactus single-handedly, right? Just absolutely ridiculous stuff, but really well done. This is written, most of it, by Ryan North, who's also the guy that's been writing some fantastic, who's been writing Fantastic Four, doing a great job on that lately. He brings in things like Doctor Doom T-Rexes and stuff like this to Fantastic Four. So he's got kind of a crazy sense of writing comics, but really well done. So Scott Lang returns in Ant-Man in anticipation of the movie, and really this character has a lot of things in sort of common with the movie version of Ant-Man. Steve Rogers actually got old at some point. If you remember, Falcon took over the Captain America title actually in 2015. We're going to see, of course, Steve's going to get better. He's not going to stay old, but nonetheless, that's, I think, is the first time that Falcon has actually been the lead character on Captain America and had the title of Captain America.
Gotcha. So. Okay.
And then, because I love to be a downer, I love to end with the downs from this beginning. We did have a couple of things that I think actually do indicate where some of the problems in the next few years are going to be coming. We actually had somebody named Ronald Wimberly, who was a colorist working on Marvel books in 2014 or 2015, who posted on social media that Marvel Editorial had actually requested he lighten the skin color of a character named Militia Gardner in a Wolverine and the X-Men story. And he's like, is this racist? And Axel Alonso, actually, he's a Mexican-American, had a pretty strong pushback against that, where he's like, what we actually said was, this is a title where there's a number of stories here. We want you to use the same color grading as that character has had in the previous ones. We're not saying lighten the skin. We're saying match the skin tone to what other colorists use.
Sure.
And, and I think that's a relatively reasonable explanation. But it also just shows that some of this is starting to make its way in. We're starting to see some of these little controversies, which will turn into bigger controversies. We also had Chris Sims, who was a co-writer on X-Men 92, which is a series that came out in 2015, kind of harkening back to the early 90s X-Men comics and animated show. Actually had a history of harassing and bullying another creator, Valerie D'Orazzo, who'd actually also written for Marvel in the past. And Alonso actually had to talk a little bit about that on the thing too. Basically, it's like, yeah, the two of them did not get along. Obviously, Sims crossed the line at some point. It's not acceptable. He's apologized for it. But they didn't take him off the title. They didn't punish him in any particular way, which I think is interesting in comparison to what we're going to see with a lot of the stuff moving forward, that there are a lot stronger penalties that start to be implemented for folks who are caught doing that sort of stuff and the like. So,
right.
But again, online bullying, some of these things where folks are really starting to push back against what they question in terms of racial fairness and the like in comics. This is a portend of what's to come in the next years.
Right. Let's move on and let's talk about notable news series then. What are some of the big titles then that started in 2015 that will actually go on and do some? I worry because I can't really say go on for a stretch of time, because as you talked about, books aren't going that long anymore before they get rebooted again.
Nope. There are like 10 of them that are going to make it 2 years. And that is on the Star Wars side, we're going to have Darth Vader and Star Wars, which Darth Vader makes it 25 issues and Star Wars goes 75. We've got that Amazing Spider-Man series that hits 51, and Unbeatable Squirrel Girl hits exactly 50. So the number of books that have had 52 or more issues is exactly one from this group. Doctor Strange, that Aaron series that we were talking about, made 37. Spider-Gwen, 34. Uncanny Avengers hits 30. Spider-Man 2099, 25. And Sam Wilson, Captain America, 24. So,
Yeah, but it's like crazy that the bottom of this list is like 12 to 14 issues. So it barely goes a year.
And those are the top ones.
Yeah.
I didn't put anything that's under that. Yeah. So, and that's things like, the Wolverine book or Guardians of the Galaxy, New Avengers, Invincible Iron Man, Astonishing Ant-Man. These should be, Ant-Man just had a $500 million movie. How can it not make it more than 13 issues?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that is the nature of it. So at this point, really what we see with new series, and this is also one of the things that's disappointing in terms of looking at this historically, is it's hard to really see any trends or traction because everything just gets rolled off the assembly line and then repackaged 2 years later, even if it's really good.
Yeah. And just looking at limited series, you have a whole page of limited series here.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And a lot of really good stuff. Secret Wars, of course, is the big one. Angela, Asgard's assassin, is that sort of, again, character coming over essentially from the Spawn universe. Miracle Man by Neil Gaiman and Buckingham. Oddly, the two of those are linked. Because part of the strange drug deal that Gaiman and McFarlane and Marvel did was that Gaiman wanted to come over and work on the Miracle Man, and they got the Miracle Man license. And then somehow, as part of buying Gaiman's portion of the Miracle Man, rights, they also got the Angela rights. So both of those kind of came in together.
Okay.
We had Armor Wars. We had, of course, Princess Leia, which ended up being a miniseries of only 5. Another Captain America. Chewbacca also was. Lando was a miniseries. Both of those are going to come back and get more books later. A-Force is going to be that female group of Avengers. You've got some George Romero Empire of the Dead stuff. So they're playing a little bit with some licensed series again. Spider-Verse came out again. Secret Wars 2099. Some of these 2099 books. All sorts of things. But really, most of them aren't even trial balloons at this point. We get a Masters of Kung Fu, we get a Runaways. We're not necessarily getting series coming out of these if they do well. You just get sort of small samples of stories, and then if anything, they'll get another limited series. They're not necessarily getting full-on series anymore.
So the thing that I noticed about this list is not only is it on the ongoing titles aren't lasting as long, but even the limited series aren't lasting very long, because like it used to be that the limited series would get 6, 8, 10, 12 issues a lot of times. If I'm thinking back to like the 90s into the early 2000s, you have one title here that got more than 6 issues, and it was Secret Wars. Everything else, 6 issues or less. Most of these are like 5 and then 4.
Yep. And that is perfect for wrapping up in a trade paperback and dumping it into Borders or Barnes and Noble or something like this. So that is part of what's happening now, is they really are starting to lean into that idea that maybe this is the way to do series, is instead of having a long running series, you're going to have something that goes a like multiple of 4 or 5 issues. You will wrap those up and either sell it as a single trade paperback or as a small series of like 2 or 3 of them in the direct market and also in bookshops. So like the Chewbacca and Princess Leia limited series, I think, did very well in bookstores after they got wrapped up. Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about new characters then across all of these new series, whether they be ongoing that don't end up going more than 2 years, or just the limited series that go like 4 issues. Did we get any like big characters this year?
No, I mean, there is one sort of with a bullet, and that is Gwenpool, who has become a fundamental character of the Marvel Universe for a lot of folks.
Okay.
Again, kind of a weird character, but a very cool one. The thing about her that's interesting is she is a comic fan who somehow or another ended up in the 616 universe. And her advantage is she knows everything about what's happening because she's read all the comics.
Sure.
And so she's a very weird meta kind of character, but is actually very for the modern way of geek media. I think she's a very canny character to add because it
Sure.
literally almost lets you have a regular reader transported in, and you get to experience that adventure with her. So she's been very popular though. So Gwenpool, I think, is by far the most important character that came out this year. There's also a character called Moon Girl, who was first brought out in something called Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur by
Sure.
Brandon
Yeah.
Montclair and Amy Reeder. Uh, she's actually been a very popular character as well. Devil Dinosaur, note, is not a new character this year. Devil Dinosaur had his own book back in the 70s, but very, very different. And so now he has teamed up with Moon Girl. And then also Blind Spot, of course, in Daredevil. He is actually, I mean, he's a big character definitely for a while, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
and he actually makes his debut in the all new, all different December issue of this year, but you don't really know what to make of that until you get into the volume 6 run that starts next year.
yep.
I was going to say
Yeah.
Joaquin Torres as the Falcon is probably the other one because he
Oh.
ended up being in the MCU.
Oh yeah, I was thinking that was just Falcon as the as Cap. Oh yeah, Joaquin Torres is definitely a big character. Because like you say, he's in there, and then also he's become a character that's done quite a bit of time in the actual comic universe as well. So very cool. And again, that's part of with a number of these. That's that idea of trying to get some new and slightly more diverse characters in. There were not a lot of Hispanic characters in the Marvel universe, and when you look at the fact that 20-30% of the American population is Hispanic, it doesn't make a lot of sense that there wasn't a few more of those characters to try and grab that market.
Yes, definitely. Let's move on and talk about series that ended this year. Obviously, there is a ton on this list. Is there any that you in particular want to call out?
If there was a comic you liked this year in the Marvel universe, it ended. I'm sorry to say. But,
Yes.
I mean, all the Avengers books, the X-Men books, Nova, Guardians of the Galaxy, Spider-Man, Magneto, Black Widow, Punisher, Daredevil, Ms. Marvel, Fantastic Four, Moon Knight, they all ended. And Moon Knight and Fantastic Four, by the way, is going to end for a while now. One of the problems we have is, I think that at least it's now, it might be a couple years from now, but Marvel got a little grouchy about the fact that Sony kept making money and making movies based off of their characters. And because of all of those license rights they sold so cheap like 20 years ago, they're not making hardly any on a Fantastic Four movie or an X-Men movie. So they sort of just disbanded the Fantastic Four and said, why are we going to keep publishing this?
Oh,
why are we going to keep, advertising Sony products? And they're like, we'll just shut them down and see if we can get to the point where Sony's like ready to sell it back to us, right? So obviously they had a tougher time doing that with X-Men because that's one of their best-selling books. But Fantastic Four had been kind of a mid-selling book for a long time. And so they just decided to sort of set them to the side a little bit because of
Sure.
the fact that they just didn't want to. They didn't want to necessarily go in and promote them. So you'll see in the notable new series, there is no new Fantastic Four coming out this year, and I don't believe there's going to be for a while.
And then, like we've been talking about, the length of time between these series endings, the number of books that have occurred, significantly less than they were a decade ago.
Yeah,
Like,
there's nothing. Nothing ended that's over 46.
Yeah. There 46 is the biggest title. Half of this list is under 20. Actually, slightly more than half this list is under 20. So it is kind of that constant reboot.
Yeah, there's like 40 some books that ended, or 40 series that ended, and only 7, 8 of them made it over 2 years. Yep. And that doesn't mean that the series are doing poorly. I just want to note that.
Right.
In this case, it partly means that they just like imploded the entire universe. But even in general, there are a lot of books that are doing perfectly well that they just decide it's time to get a new number one out because we're changing creative teams or whatever.
Right. All right. So let's talk about the bullpen this year. So Axel Alonso is our editor-in-chief, as you talked about with regards to the Secret Wars event. How many creators got a credit this year in a Marvel title?
536.
That's kind of consistent. I feel like the last year or two, it's been right around in that 525 to 550 range or so.
Yep, and there's 539 titles. I think we've been getting to a point where it seems to be not exact, but where there's a somewhat one-to-one relationship between the number of titles that they've produced and the number of creators that are credited. So we've been down around 400 and some titles with 400 and some creators. We've been up around 700 titles, at which point we didn't have quite 700 creators, but we had close to that. This one is kind of in the middle, and part of that is also though that 300 and some of them are new, and 400 and some of them are ending. So we are going to, at least for 1 year, have a little bit of a retrenchment.
Right. And so you were saying, of that, how many got their first credit this year?
106 of them. Again, not a huge number, but it's up a little bit. I also will note that as we go into Rookie of the Year, you'll see that there are a number of really talented creators, like female creators and the like, that got their start. They're trying to make a little bit of a push to get a slightly different staff, to get a few more voices in that aren't just your sort of classic, sort of middle-aged white dude type of thing.
Sure. All right. So before we talk about Rookie of the Year, you have a notable passing for Marvel this year.
Yeah, Herb Trimpe, who is an American artist. He actually was the first artist on the Incredible Hulk after it was rebooted in the Silver Age. Trimpe did a lot of work on war books and the like. He is a sort of a classic Marvel artist. I was never somebody who read a lot of Trimpe books. He did some, I think, Iron Man stuff that I read and the like, but definitely is somebody to be noted because he was an important part of the Marvel bullpen in the 60s, especially.
Gotcha. All right, so let's talk Rookie of the Year. There are some very good choices here that did not win the Rookie of the Year. Tell us about some of those creators.
Yeah, a lot of these didn't win primarily because they mostly just didn't do that much work for Marvel. They were great creators who then sort of got away. But some of the names just that had their first Marvel credit this year would be people like Jeff Lemire, Tamara Ben Villen, Marguerite Sauvage, Jody Hauser, Daniel Warren Johnson, Otto Schmidt, all of whom had relatively limited careers with Marvel, but are all creators who I've enjoyed the work of. Daniel Warren Johnson is a good example of why it's hard to do these lists for me now, because if we'd done this a year or two ago, he might not have made the list. But now with the work he's been doing on Transformers and stuff, he's suddenly become a really big sort of hot creator. So the list is definitely changing. The weird thing is, it is not easy to make it in comics. And there are a lot of people who even now are on this list, or who aren't on this list of those 106 people, who somebody listening to this a couple of years from now may go, how in the world did they not mention this person, you know?
Right.
So such is the way. As far as other folks, Kelly Thompson had her first Marvel credits this year. She, of course, worked on Captain Marvel and the Carol Corps, Rogue and Gambit, Jessica Jones, some Kate Bishop stuff, Black Widow stuff. She has famously done the It's Jeff Infinity comics, which is basically like this weird little pet shark.
Jeff the baby land shark.
Jeff the baby land shark, who has now become actually someone who has made the transition to print as well. There are actually Jeff comics out there, like physical comics as well. Thompson, though, in my mind, has done a lot of her best work over at DC and other places. So I really enjoy her stuff, but I don't know that most of her best work is at Marvel, unfortunately for Marvel. Robbie Thompson has worked on Deadpool and a lot of Infinity comics. He's actually got quite a few credits for Marvel. Donny Cates is for those people who are fans of the Venomverse, this would probably be, without a question, their choice for the Rookie of the Year. Because he is a key writer on Venom, Thanos, he's done Doctor Strange, he's done Thor, he's done Hulk. Cates is actually a really, really good writer and has done some great stuff with some of those characters. And I think in many ways has made characters like Venom kind of his own. So he would not be a bad choice.
But I'm not going to argue with the winner that you have here. And it's somebody that I think both of us just absolutely love the work that he's done on one of our favorite characters. And he's led a crossover event. Absolutely.
So, as I note in the notes, this may not be an entirely dispassionate decision on my part, right? I absolutely love Jed MacKay's work on Moon Knight. I think he's taken the character in a direction that is sort of fresh and interesting and has really just absolutely knocked it out of the park for the last probably 4 years now on that title. He has also written a bunch of great Black Cat stuff. Marvel is more and more starting to trust him with big books. He took over the Avengers. He wrote the Blood Moon event, the main miniseries for that, and sort of helped coordinate that. I think that MacKay may well be becoming one of those architects of the Marvel Universe for the next decade or so.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to mention I remembered that he took over the Avengers as well, like within the last year or so. So it's like, don't feel like you can get much higher profile on the Marvel line than to be asked to take over the Avengers title.
Yep, that is correct. And yet he still makes time to go out and visit, like our friends over at the End of the Night podcast and the like, which I think is also cool. He seems to be somebody who genuinely wants to make comic books that people love, and also somebody who spent a lot of time studying, and he brings back these crazy, 8-ball characters and stuff like this, and weird people from the past. So I think he's a student of Marvel history, and he's also a really good writer.
Go for 8-ball. Yep, exactly. All right, Dan, we're running along, but before we go, I have to know your favorite Marvel comic from 2015.
I would say that unusually, the crossover Secret Wars was actually pretty good. I enjoyed the Secret Wars crossover. I think it did good stuff, and the way that it set up the future was impressive in that it told an interesting story and also accomplished what they wanted to do. But as far as I'm concerned, the Aaron Bacallo Doctor Strange series from this year is hands down the best Marvel Comics sort of property of the year.
I am not surprised by that pick, and the part of it that I did read, I thoroughly enjoyed as well. So consider that an extra check to the favorite books from this year, since I've actually read those.
Excellent.
All right. And with that, I think that's going to wrap it up for us for this week. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That will help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast, you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Tell us if you liked Dark Knight 3 or we missed a creator that started in 2015. We want to know about it. Send us those comments. Email comments@comicsovertime.com, or you can reach out to us on social media. We're Blue Sky @comicsovertime there. Dan, we kind of talked a little bit about what was going on with Daredevil this year, but it's actually a pretty good year, and we wrap up another volume, and we do actually have to say goodbye to Mark Waid this year.
Yep. Gonna be interesting. Looking forward to seeing what you think of this one.
I guess not just Mark Waid, but him and Chris Samney both.
The whole crew. I think they change editors and everything. It's just a complete change of cast and crew.
And if you recall, we were in the middle of a story with the Purple Man, so I think you need to tune back in next week when we talk about it. Until then, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.